I know it's silly. I'm trying not to do it anymore. And like, I was like, I'm not going to do that. I'm shutting up. Not doing that. It's silly.
Our last episode had quite a few views.
Did it? I shared it with my students.
That might be why. Is it pointless to aim lower than 100%? That was season 2, episode 12. Here we are at season 2, episode 13.
It's possible that because I switched all the titles on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I hadn't put the sound on.
Oh, you switched. So you put the title first and then the name or the episode
tangents.
number.
Because our episode names are very long.
They are.
Not always. Last week was short, so maybe that's why. Don't know. Or maybe that's a question people have on their minds. I don't know.
Well, today's question is a long question. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. When playing games, is it better to win or to make people want to play with you again? In that regard, do you consider life as a game? There are rules to follow. You try to do what you enjoy, blah, blah, blah.
It's a great question. Plus, I think it's like seems to be tailored for me as well. So it's sweet.
Well, it's
not just me, obviously. The game of life is a phrase and that's been around for a long time, way before.
It has. And given that we started playing last night, which was very funny.
Yeah, we started playing a game of Fiasco. So I'm really super happy that we're setting up a tabletop role playing game.
Cool. I'm excited about it.
Tabletop role playing game.
Yeah, and I'm excited about using Miro as well.
Miro.com is awesome. I've used it for workshops. I mean, to me, it's the best online collaborative virtual. The equivalent is Mural, but anyway, let's go to the question. Okay, so I could go on a tangent about.
Well done.
Sorry?
You brought yourself back there. Very good.
I do that. I have to do that to operate in real life. You realize, right? I mean, this is the hour of a treat where I get to. I mean, I do it all the time, and I do it with my students as well. I try not to stay on too long tangents, but I
do tangents a lot in my lessons, and on the survey I did in my teaching, there were a couple of comments saying, "Can't always see the stories are cool, but and other students love it. Other students really get because I always link it back, but seeing the connections between ideas, I think, is a really important thing to be able to do. And if I can, as long as I can articulate it, it doesn't matter. But sometimes I have students who are very much like, teach me what I need to know so I can pass the exam.
Yes.
And that's it. So it's all a game, which brings us back to the question. When playing games, is it better to win or to make people want to play with you again?
So number one is, I think, just like the teaching thing, well, not the teaching thing, but what you just said about, you think it's important to get how ideas relate and how things connect with each other, with one another. I think that I agree, and I think that's why we enjoy these conversations a lot. I mean, and hope that maybe other people might too, but I think it's not everybody's jam, and if you take it as, now it's not sure, but for example, we both know Gallup Strength Finders.
Yep.
The positive psychology psychometric test and idea that we all have a certain amount of strengths, and it's better to focus on our strengths than actually beat ourselves out of the head for things that we're weak at, or spend too much time in our lives overcoming our weaknesses. And ideation, which is that ability to be able to see ideas and things and how they connect together that don't seem to be connected, is in that test and in that worldview a particular strength, meaning that some people have it and some people don't. So it's not, I think it's not everybody's, not everyone is as able, or it doesn't come as easily to connect all those different things together in the tangents. So I agree that it's important, and I also get that some people are like, well, that's not really how I think or how I look at things. And I don't mean to convince the people that don't get that, but I think it's an interesting point. And where I was going with this is similarly, some of the psychology around play has similar ideas, that some people are competitive and want to win, and some people are different, and there's different kinds of play personalities, which we briefly touched upon, and that comes from the book from Dr. Stuart Brown about play, and he talks about these play personalities, which are so he comes up with 8 different kinds of play personalities. And similarly, if you go to look to another sociology book, The Man, Play and Games from Roger Caillois, a French sociologist, that I've talked about that book as well, another foundational essay and study on play and games. And he categorizes not necessarily players, but different types of games, or different types of play, rather.
Okay.
And so it's interesting to look at those different kinds of play, and the question itself relates to different kinds of play. So whether one thing is better or not is an interesting question, but it's entirely possible that depending on who you are, it's not even whether it's better or not, like it's part of your nature to be playing in a certain way. So for example, I know that I'm not competitive. And some people are really competitive, and it's part of who they are to play to win.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, competition is also one of those. So there's 34 strengths in the Gallup Strengths Finder model, which you've been trained to coach in as well.
Yep.
And so you know even more. But we've talked about it before. I know it really well. I enjoy this way of looking at things. I also interviewed the host of their podcast, which is a really interesting podcast. If ever you take the Gallup Strengths Finder psychometric test to find out about your strengths, I would encourage you to listen to their podcast, because they have a lot of resources where they talk about the different strengths, where you can put them in action a little bit above and beyond just getting an interesting thing of like, oh yeah, that's kind of like me, which you could get out of a Myers-Briggs or get out of an astrology chart, to be honest.
Yeah. It's true. A lot of the time people do the test and then go, oh, that's like me, and then leave it in the drawer and don't apply it and use it. And
sometimes it's difficult to figure out what to do with it. That's
exactly
why the podcast can really help. And or of course the model of the company is to they have coaches which sell their services. But you can hire a coach, obviously, but if you don't want to necessarily hire a coach, just listening to the podcast will give you a lot of insight on what to do with the information you learn when you do the test.
And I like the positive, uplifting nature of it. I really like what you're saying about play personalities, because as you said that, I'm now thinking about how do I play games. And for example, in my family, when we have big family gatherings at Christmas, Easter, whatever, we always end up playing some kind of game, cards, a board game, Jenga, whatever it is. And partly because of how I am, but also partly because everyone knows I work as a teacher. Everyone looks to me to kind of get everything going. And it's because I follow the rules. I like following the rules, understanding the rules, because it provides a structure. And then, but interestingly,
you're the leader. It's not just you're a teacher. You must be some kind of leader that people would automatically look to you to.
I think so.
James, you lead the thing. Go ahead.
I think so. But then the interesting thing is, once I know the rules, I like breaking them and pushing the boundaries. And
by cheating, or
it depends on who I'm with, because when I'm with my family, there are particular family members who are known for always cheating.
Yes, of course.
Always cheating. But like when we were playing the game last night, I was just fiddling with Miro, and then you it was like you put on teacher voice, because you were like,
I was guiding the game.
Please don't unlock anything that's locked. I was like, oh, that was me. I just unlocked everything and then changed it around, and then it was
that I didn't mind. That's funny, because I was guiding, so I didn't really pay attention to the mayhem on the Miro board, which I didn't mind at all until somebody unlocked the thing. That's like my nightmare. People unlocking and moving things around.
That was me.
Because of course it happened when I did a big workshop with a lot of people, and I had a structure with people to answer all sorts of questions. And of course, when you have a lot of people just playing around, and that's exactly the same thing was happening, which is like a lot of people had never used Miro, so they're just messing around. and probably not listening to any of what I'm saying on like what the workshop is about, probably. And then there was, and it was an experiment to see if I could do this large scale because I had like 30 people on there or more, and I had set up
Interestingly,
a bunch of exercises for everybody, and it was all locked in such a way that there was a frame with post-its on top, and you're supposed to only touch the post-its and answer the questions. And of course, some people just started moving the whole thing around, and it was just complete mayhem. And I was congratulated particularly for going like nothing was going right in that experimental, because of course super experimental. I was like, can I do a large scale insight driven exercise with 50 people on a Miro board, and never have done this before, and this with professionals that I'd never met before, and possibly appear completely ridiculous. Anyway, that's part of my like.
But everything you're saying,
most normal people would go, no, we're never going to experience this with a live audience of people who could be professional peers, clients, etc. You should test it before. And I was like, I did a couple of tests with 4 people. Seems to possibly work. Let's try 50.
But interestingly, everything you're saying relates to the whole world of play and games. There's structure, and then people mess with the structure. So I like to know the structure before I mess with it.
Yeah.
And that's like, but I don't think I'm that competitive, really.
Yeah, I'm not. So competition. So as we said, there's 34 Gallup Strength Finder strengths. So you look first, the test gives you top 5, and ideas is in my top 5. And there's the top bottom, and competition is in my bottom. I think it's the last or before last. It's something that just like, I don't have much competitive fiber in my body. It doesn't really interest me much. I love to play, and I love to, what was the other option on participate was in the question? That was, is it better to play to win or what?
Play to win or make people want to play with you again.
So that's, I think what's really interesting about the question is those two things are highlighted.
Yeah.
Better to play to win or make other people want to have other people play with you again. So it's almost like, well, what's really interesting is the person asking the question. Now, of course, I'm extrapolating, and it may or may not be true, but that those two worlds are mutually exclusive. Because you could play to win, and in such a way that everybody wants to play with you again, but that doesn't seem to occur to the person asking the question.
Well, hang on a minute. Play to win. See, even me, I'm thinking they're mutually exclusive, because for me, winning means dominating and being better than someone else. So you think
you can be better than somebody else without dominating?
You think you can play to win and have people want to play with you again?
Well, so the fact that you play to win doesn't necessarily mean that you do.
True.
So now, and play to win is such a major trope in our society, and like everything to do in sports. And I think there's a lot to unpack even in just that little bit of the question. Like we could talk about the idea of play to win for a while. And I think play to win is both great. Like it's absolutely great to play to win. I mean, it makes total sense in a lot of situations to play to win. However, there's also how it's said, and I'm thinking of, I don't know, stereotypical characters in TV shows or movies, like the coach type, like the sports coach or the father sports coach that is probably mean and you got to play to win. And like, there's a whole anger, and just, if you're not there to win, then you're worthless. So there's a whole area of very stereotypical value judgments.
Yeah.
That is not play. That when you go there, you're not playing anymore. It's not a game.
Yeah.
And that type of character who tells you got to play to win or you're worthless is not play. Yeah. And actually, if you ask that character if we're playing, they'd go, no, we're at war or something like that. So you've left the realm of play. And how do you know that? How do you know whether you are in the realm of play or not? You can look at a few different areas. But for example, the 2 references that I'm thinking about are like my 2, and there's a third that I need to read. I want to. It's probably my next book.
Peter Gray's book, maybe.
Well, I want to read Peter Gray because you told me great things about it. No, but I was talking about Huizinga. Huizinga is a sociologist and psychologist, and he wrote a book. He wrote one of the seminal reference books about play called Homo Ludens. That Roger Caillois refers back to in the 1960s, and that book is from the 1930s.
Wow. Okay, I need to read that too.
Yeah, so I want to read that. I know it's on my list. It's I haven't read it yet. So anyway, that there's him, and Peter Gray actually has a good list of from one of the blog posts I read of him in Psychology Today. I think I can't remember exactly. Of the characteristics of play that are very similar to the ones from Roger Caillois in Man, Play, and Games, which is also, I recommend the read. It's a great read. So I'm looking for the. So there's a certain number of characteristics that say whether something is play. So there's 6 different ones. And if those are not there, then what's going on is not play anymore.
Yeah, and it's things like for its own sake, isn't it?
It's, I'll tell you in a second. I have them.
There's a certain amount of space for things. There are definitely rules.
Yeah, those are not rules. Those are characteristics of play, because play is, and Stuart Brown in his book does the same. It's so one, it's a concept. So play is an abstract concept, but it's also a human and or animal behavioral phenomenon.
It is. Yeah.
It's both those things. And it's which is why it's difficult to define. You have to define it using at the same time abstract concepts, and it's not like I can define it like, okay, this is a physical object with properties in physical reality that I can describe to you.
What the hell is that?
This is the thing to open letters. What's it called?
A letter opener. It didn't even look like that. I was like, oh, what is that? Okay, right. I see what it is.
It's a letter opener.
Yeah, it looks cool.
I'll take a pen, not to confuse you. Okay.
Yeah, a pen. Okay, it's a pen. Yeah,
it's a pen. We can describe it. If you've never seen a pen in your life, I can describe it. I can tell you what it does. Play, and like a brand, which is why I don't know whether it's a good thing or not, but I'm explaining to my students how a brand is an abstract concept first, before anything else.
Yeah.
Which is also, because it's an abstract concept, there's a lot of different ways to define it. And rather than argue with all the people what the right definition is, the most important point is to admit that it's an abstract concept. And because of that, there's going to be subjective different views on what it actually is. And all of them are probably useful to understand the concept.
That's a great place to start with anything that's abstract. Because sometimes I think people hold on to this, it is this.
Yeah, they want to hold on to a true version, but except there is no one true version.
Yeah.
Well, so people have convictions, and so anyway, play. Let me get to the. I have them around here.
So while you're looking at, I want to just mention this idea of a definite answer. This happens in my classes a lot. I don't want to tell my students, this is how you answer a question. Sometimes I'll even say, like, play with it, grapple with it.
It's very difficult, but it's very difficult for them to understand. One of the things I should do more of, and I've been told by other teachers, is to give them an example of what I mean by, a correct type of answer. Now, I need to do more of that myself, because
and I do that, but the problem is that they get very fixed on this way of answering a question, and then when they go into the exam or when they produce an answer and I don't give them the mark that they expect, they're like, but I did everything. And I'm like, yeah, but qualitatively it's just it's not there. And then it's a process. It's a whole, you have to explore, which brings, I think, what play is. It's this exploratory adventure of discovery.
So I've got them now. So there's 6.
You got them?
6 core characteristics that are very similar to the characteristics that Peter Gray defines them as, but this is from Roger Caillois.
Yep.
So 1, it's free, not obligatory.
So you don't have to if you don't want to.
Yeah, you don't have to if you don't want to. And if it becomes forced, then it's not play anymore.
Okay.
2, it's separate from the routine of life. It occupies its own time and space. Okay, separate from the rest of life.
Okay.
3, so it's defined. This is all defining play as an activity. So to know, 3, it's uncertain, so that the results of play cannot be predetermined, and so the player's initiatives is involved. So there's the concept of agency.
This
Which
is
one?
you. The two things that are funny is this is us yesterday when playing the game on the Miro board, but I'm also thinking of you in your workshop.
Mm-hmm.
You just had no idea
Yeah.
what it was going to be like to have 30 people virtually
I
messing
knew the
around
whole
something.
thing was very likely to go in disaster, but
But that's what
I
makes
thought
it
it was worth
interesting.
it. And I
Oh
was
yeah,
like, I was pent on, I could do a video thing where I'm just chatting like everybody else is doing in the middle of the COVID
yeah,
pandemic. And that was
yeah,
last year, right? I
yeah.
was like, I could do something that nobody's ever done before. And it could fail spectacularly or succeed spectacularly.
Which one do you think it did? Do you think it
Oh, it
fails?
failed.
You think it fails
Complete. Well,
spectacularly?
but that said, it failed in. Yeah, I think it failed spectacularly. Now that said, people had fun. It was something they'd never done before, never seen before. It didn't go well from a technical standpoint because you had people from all over the world. There was like from multiple continents, varying different degrees of internet connections,
Uh-huh.
all kinds of things to go wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And the safe thing would have been to do a talk with slides and just talk about things like, I could have pulled out the 6 characteristics of play and blah blah about it, and I probably would have looked good, but it would have been like everything else. And I was bent on, and I need to do more of these practice mock workshops that I
Once you
was doing at
like
the time.
if you do, I guarantee. I know if you do it again, I guarantee you do it again, it'll be way better. It'll just keep getting better.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. And so I think I didn't finish that one sentence. The one thing that people were impressed by
Yeah.
is how I kept my cool. It's just like it seems like, and I was told that I seem
Mm.
to have everything in hand, and I was still smiling, going with the flow, bouncing back from people were saying, asking people to participate in the chat, taking care of the disaster of the Miro board, going on Zoom. And I was like, cool, this is not working. Let's move on to the next thing. All right, how is everybody doing?
So
And
okay, so
while I was very much like the analogy of the duck in water, like
yeah,
just
yeah.
looking like I'm gliding, but just going, oh, this is not going on. This is not going on.
So I can hear. So you've met, what was that? The third characteristic was it's uncertain, right? Was that
Yeah,
the third one?
uncertainty.
So
So
I can hear
you
that.
don't. So there's player
Yep.
agencies, and you don't know what the outcome is going to be.
Right. Okay.
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 4, it is technically unproductive. I said technically. I added the technically in that it creates no wealth and ends as it begins. So there's no physical. So it's technically it's not its intention, which is where it's tricky to add play when in work stuff, which is also interesting. Technically, you don't produce new goods, new material, new thinking, but it does facilitate a lot of that. I also say, but it's anyway. It's got so
Oh.
number 5. It's governed by rules that
Yeah.
suspend ordinary laws and behaviors, and that must be followed by the players. Okay, so you arbitrarily decided there are new rules, and there are a set of rules.
Okay.
Anyway, whatever they are. At 6, it involves make-believe that confirms for players the existence of imagined realities that may be set against real life. The quotes.
Oh, do you know? I'm like inspired to take these 6 and use them to plan every single lesson, and
It's
just
a good thing.
because sometimes in my lessons, I was teaching a lesson last week, and I had the class in groups, and they were doing a present. They were giving like a short presentation about things, and then I was getting the class to rate what they thought of the presentation and the content, and then I was marking it on the board, and the class were like, they were participating, they were going for it. So much so because I had the door open, another staff member poked his head round to see what was going on, and it was one of those moments where I was like, oh dear, have I lost control of the class because another teacher is looking in? Do I look really bad? Like, it was, because if that happens in a school, if another teacher is checking what's going on, that's generally not a good thing. It's not a good thing. And I did have a fleeting experience going, oh my God, this is so bad, and whatever. The class were completely engaged. They were just like talking over each other and debating about it shouldn't have been it should have been 3, like that whole thing. There was that edge of everything that you're saying. I can hear that was happening. It was going on. But I think
Yeah,
that would be this idea of understanding the game and play and bringing that to planning lessons for teachers would be amazing.
I agree with the because when there's another one, and I talk about a play state of mind, and Stuart Brown talks about that in play. Well, I'm repeating what he's saying, but so you talk about a state of mind also, because I'm trying to bring those ideas within a work environment, which some people think is kind of popular, but I got to be a little bit careful about how I do it. But the class thing is the same. So the play when you bring it and when it's there, and you can feel it as a vibe. It doesn't. So it creates vitality. It generates creativity, new ideas. So a lot of energy and a lot of really positive, fantastic things. And the opposition between work and play. So work and play are not actually opposites in the first place. We made them so. And reading a book like Discipline and Punish is the creation of everything to do with productivity. That to be able to be productive, you need to be silent, you need to be staying in a row, you need to be following. It's the destruction of play. And it's really interesting. And in the name of productivity, because play is not productive. Play is more chaotic. It's closer to chaos, but not really, because to have play, people need to be following a certain amount of rules. Otherwise, it's just chaos. So, but if you think about chaos and order on that kind of traditional spectrum, it is going a little bit more towards the chaos than it is towards the full order. At least it seems to be that way. And
you're describing my classrooms.
I think it's awesome, and we learn. And by the way, we learn through play. We learn a lot more through play than we do through anything else. But
that's what Peter Gray talks a lot about. He talks about,
of course, because that's what his book is about, I think, right? And
I
want to read it. And schools are designed, because that's from Discipline and Punish. Schools are designed for discipline. They're designed for discipline because in the Industrial Revolution, that seems to be the best way to organize people. And what's needed is to organize and beat the vitality and the play out of people. But they don't see it as beating the vitality or the play, but they see it as, the small kids have got all this energy. We got to beat it out of them to make them productive members of society. And work is this is coming from the sociologist Max Weber on the idea of, work is basically a Protestant virtue, and it's a Judeo-Christian virtue as well, but more so on the Protestant side of things, Northern Europe, than the Catholics. So I was talking about Max Weber because Max Weber has a whole book in which he's a sociologist and philosopher, and he distinguishes and looks at the differences between Southern Europe that is more predominantly Catholic and Northern Europe that is more Protestant. And Northern Europe tends to be more, or at least stereotypically, but it's kind of true. It has the reputation for being more productive, more busybody, more working than Southern Europe that tends to be a little bit more taking it easy and more charity, more family values. Not that the North doesn't have family values, but big table with a lot of people around the table, enjoying a Sunday afternoon of carousing and a big family meal, whereas the stereotypical, like from my father in the Netherlands, is going to be, the people don't talk around the table. You eat and you eat to be fed, and that's done. It's just, I'm exaggerating massively, of course, right? But we're talking as a system overall, and
it's interesting when you start to point out what's happening at a kind of deeper or higher level, because I do say that to my students. It's my job to beat the creativity out of you. I've said that, especially the older ones, and you can see.
So the play is something that's innate. It's biological.
Oh wow!
All mammals play,
and
all animals play. Whereas work is not biological. Work is a made-up human thing.
This is good.
Which is why they're not opposites in my mind. They were created as they were. We generated them being opposite in view of work, but play is natural.
Yeah.
Work is not natural. Work is something that's made up by human society, which is nothing wrong. It's just saying that I'm just saying that they're not opposites. They're just different concepts.
No, and I think I think that's a great point that you're making, because too often we don't think of that. I don't think of. We were talking about motivation in business in one of my classes, and I said that doing a good job and wanting to do a really good job and get it and improve it and make it better motivates me. And there's one student who was like, "Nah, you're lying. No way. It's all about money. There's no way that you do your job just because you want to get better and just because you want to do the best." And I was like, yeah,
kind of
it
sad
is.
to think that, isn't it?
It is. That's what he thinks. And this is a student who wants to be a doctor. And he's a sharp cookie. He knows he's not, he's not just messing around for the sake of it. He genuinely thinks that, because I didn't believe him that he thought that. And he's like, he really thought, he couldn't get his head round that I would actually think that what motivates me is I want to do a good job and I want to be the best and I want to make things better. He could not conceive that. And it's really interesting listening to you like separate this, like work is a whole made up human thing and play is innate. It makes yeah, I know that, but it doesn't get articulated very much.
Yeah. And play is not necessarily chaotic. And then again, to our play personalities.
Yep.
So we list the 8 ones that come from the book Play from Stuart Brown. The 8 ones are the joker, the explorer, the artist or creator, the storyteller, the kinesthete, the competitor, the collector, and the director.
And some of those are going to be more prevalent in the films, the things we see in what's embodied in our politicians than others.
Typically, you're not just one, you might be 2, but it would immediately come to you like which ones you probably tend to major on, right? Because it's not really... of course, back to the question, is it better to play to win? If you're a competitor, you probably do that anyway.
Yeah.
And is it? But again, I find the correlate the juxtaposition funny to say like, is it better to play in such a way that people want to play with you again? So I'm like, well, why wouldn't you do that anyway, regardless? Or is the person asking the question do they have issues on playing with other people? Is there something going on there? I don't know. But I would say that if you play, then of course you want to take care of others. So I think that's an important part of the question to come back to it. Whatever you're playing, look after other people. Of course, you play in a way that you want to play, that you would want them to. How does it formulated again? Want them to play with you again? Something like
that? Is it better to win or to make people want to play with you again?
Okay, I can actually. This is doubly interesting. To make you can't. So one, to be sure, like this is another tangent, but it is related to the question. You can't make people do anything.
Yeah.
Or you can't make people want anything.
Yeah.
You can look like you can force them. You can dominate them. You can manipulate them, but you can't make them, or unless you force them. But really, that's not what you want, because then again, that's not play. All of those things that are described are moving away from play. Manipulation, force, coercion, it's not play. Now, I know it's semantics, but it's interesting to dig into the semantics, because we think that, I can make people, and you can't make people do anything.
What about with play?
You can the best you can do, not the best you can do, but you can, what I was just saying before, look after people.
Yeah.
Be considerate. Now, it's never a surefire. It's never a surefire process. You don't really know what's going on in other people's minds. One very bad idea, and we do it. We all do it. We all do it at some other point. It's just because it's so easy to see how other people are based on our perspective. What I mean by that is we all have blind spots, right? In the sense that we don't necessarily see how we behave. We don't necessarily see what kind of impact it has on others. And by that, I mean blind spots. And when we talk about better knowing each other or ourselves, it's all the different ways that you might use to discover your blind spots. So strengths finders and meditation, everything that we talk about all the time.
You can relate that to strengths, because the Clifton, it's actually called, they don't call it Strengths Finder anymore, they call it Clifton Strengths, named after the guy Don Clifton who created the idea. And our strengths give us a useful way of realizing we see the world in a particular way, and then we forget that other people see the world in a completely different way.
Sure.
And then that's when you end up with butting heads with people, forgetting that you're just doing things the way you think because that's what you're brilliant at, and then someone else is doing it their way because they're brilliant at that. But not, the way I like to remember it is if you have a hammer, everything becomes a nail.
Yes.
And it's
we
really
love
easy
to
to
explain
forget
to other people how they are.
Yes.
Or tell them their faults or how they could improve or whatever they're not seeing. And we often believe that it's in service of them, particularly if you're with close friends. But it usually, most of the time, is some wild coaching where you're telling them something that they don't see themselves. And also you're telling them things from your perspective that just look different from theirs. So in the end, really what you're doing most of the time is you're beating them on the head, like with a hammer, and thinking they're a nail, and they're not a nail. They're your friend, or they're another person that see the world very differently from you.
But
another idea on like listening to the other person's world rather than telling them how they are and how they should be living or how they should be being.
Now, play seems to facilitate.
I don't know. We might have gone a little bit further out.
No, I don't think we have, because I think play facilitates that kind of coming together of people.
If you pay attention to the characteristics, then so for example, it's voluntary. So if you're doing anything that is forcing anybody, it's not play anymore. And usually we do that without realizing. So why would people want to play with you? Well, I guess just, be yourself, approach the game of life, because was there another part of the sentence on the game of life? So we didn't address that yet.
So the second bit of the question is in regards to the question about playing games, do you consider life as a game?
Yes, I do. Well, you mean it's a colloquial, like the game of life that we mentioned at the beginning. And I do it's one of those funny ones that I probably do when I don't, and I don't when I do.
You're gonna have to explain that.
Yeah, sure. So you're playing the game of life as a game where you're not paying attention to the fact that it is a game. You're just enjoying your life. The moments when I'm questioning, that I'm worrying, that I'm being anxious of what I said, or that I'm, I don't know, that I'm whatever anxiety I might be having, or if I'm beating myself on the head or feeling emotionally embarrassed about something that I did, or feeling a bit down or whatever, those are the moments where I am not playing a game. It's all very serious. It's about what I've done or how I'm feeling. And then that point, it's not a game. I'm not experiencing play anymore. So if you're not experiencing play, you're not playing a game. And that's what I mean. But I probably am playing the game of life. And so simply said, if you are in a state of mind of play, then you're playing. And what you're doing every time you're drawing breath is living. So that's the game of life. That's it. And if I'm not experiencing play, I'm not playing the game of life. And seeing life as a game, well, ultimately, yes, it is. It's a game where, as far as we know, or as far as I know, you get one life, not more than one. And it lasts until it lasts. And I mean, you can then define exactly what you want to take out of it, but usually there's a lot that's already defined on top of you, particularly when you're developing for a lot of your students and our students that are still developing, and we're still developing throughout all our lives. All our lives. So to understand yourself better is understand everything that you're coming with, as in all the different things that played a massive influence on the way that you grew up. Your environment, your parents, your own genetic makeup, and your personalities that comes through, probably a part genetic, nurture versus nature, which go figure exactly what the half and half is between how you were brought up and what your personality innate personality might be. All of those things contribute, and so better understanding them is like better understanding your token, the board, the rules. And there's not really any massive rules aside from the ones that you've been taught. I broke my pen. Anyway, the ones that you've been taught, the ones that are technical, just, I don't know, the law of the country where you live.
You could say culture is a set of rules.
It is a set of rules.
Culture is a set of rules, a set of attitudes, a set of norms, and that's what you're born into, and that becomes the game that you play.
Yep.
And certainly everything you said, I think everything you said is really great.
And it's not just there's not brilliant. Just one. So there's probably 8 million games going on at the same time. There's a lot of conventions from a lot of people about how it should be played. But there's also no, technically, if you're playing, there's no invalid one. So your student who says, well, actually, what's worth it? What did he say? It's like money? No. What was driving him?
He said he didn't believe that I was motivated by wanting to do the best that I could.
What was motivating him? It's not sure. Not sure.
It was more because I specifically asked them to write a paragraph about what motivates Mr. D'Souza. And they were like, money, paycheck, money, getting more money, promotion. And then some of them did say like the teaching children, and that was pretty much it, actually. That was all they said.
Where I was going with this is whatever motivates them is technically as valid as whatever motivates you. That's something else.
Yeah.
Now, there is also, generally speaking, a lot to be discovered about what motivates you and whether it's a game or not, because a lot of times it isn't.
Or we're not even aware of what it is.
Oh, we're not aware of what drives us most of the time.
Yeah.
But if you feel forced into doing something and it's like, this is the way things should be, then it's probably not play anyway. And again, you are when you are inside of play, you know that you're in the play state of mind, and that's when you're playing the game of life. And when you're not,
does that mean can you play without other players? Could you play by yourself?
Yes, you can play by yourself.
I said by.
Yeah, of course.
Not with.
Yeah, because play is a state of mind. Sorry, I couldn't miss that one. Play, if you take it, play as being a state of mind, and it's an activity with the characteristics that we described earlier, right? So as long as those characteristics are present, then you're playing. Now, do you need to do anything to be playing the game of life? Well, drawing breath. Technically, as long as your heart's beating and you're drawing breath, you're in the game of life. This is, but this is the philosophical concept. You don't necessarily, you're just like, what? I'm breathing. Yeah, I'm living. Yes, you are. You could also say, well, yeah, I'm living and then playing the game of life.
This is great.
Now, so you don't have to, this whole thing of the game of life. Of course, you don't have to. You could just say like, well, I'm just living. You're like, well, yes, of course. But I found it kind of cool to be thinking, well, all right, well, I could see this whole thing as, and it doesn't mean not taking it seriously. When you play a game, you can take it very seriously. And this is a game I would encourage you to take very seriously, but not necessarily significantly.
So you're gonna have to explain the difference between serious and significant.
So I mean, so significant means it's like heavy. Significant means you're putting a lot of weight to the meaning of it, right? And we do that naturally, but typically, if we're putting a lot of weights to something, there's a lot of rather negative emotions that are showing up that make it that you're probably not in a state of mind of play at that particular point. So if you're feeling bad about yourself, or you did something that you're kind of embarrassed by, or you had you just rejected, and nobody likes being rejected for whatever, right? Let's say for work, or you had a bad grade, or you wanted to date somebody and they said no, or you were dating somebody and they cut it off. All those different feelings. And it's funny because I was talking to a student this week about her internship for work, and it didn't go as planned. And so they mutually agreed to end the internship with her employer.
Okay.
And you could transpose that situation to whatever environment. You can transpose it, because I had something very similar recently in romantic life with somebody I had a few dates with. Even though I didn't necessarily, not that I didn't care at all, but I was like, okay, this isn't probably not the right thing. And in the case of the student with the work, it was not working. So but it's still not nice to be rejected, even though you didn't want it. That was my point.
Yeah.
The point being that the feelings of rejection make it that you're not in play. And typically when you start feeling rejected or whatever, you have some kind of negative feeling, emotion, something that didn't work out, then it's heavy, and then it's significant, and then you're not playing the game of life probably at that particular point. So if you're so playing the game seriously is also another analogy as being in the zone, the flow, the concept of flow. If you look at, and if you've seen the movie Soul that we've talked about before, where they talk about the concept of flow from the famous psychologist Mihail Csikszentmihalyi. I know that it's not that difficult to say, but every time I think of his name is
whenever I think of that, I know who you mean.
Csikszentmihalyi, something like that.
I know the one you mean.
I'm sorry, butcher his name every time, probably far from being the only one, but the idea being that like big sports people, players, and sport is play, it's a game. They take it extremely seriously when they are being in the zone as you're in a state of flow, and high levels of play bring that state of flow. But that's taking it extremely seriously, but probably not significantly in a way at that particular point when you're in a state of flow, when you're in the zone, you're not worried about whether you're doing well or not, thinking that you did badly, thinking that you're doing badly, being worried about the last time where you lost or what your dad said when you were a kid or even yesterday. You're not thinking about all those things.
No, you're totally focused on that one thing.
Yes, exactly. So, so that's what I'm talking about. And to bring it back to the question, if you're worried about making people wanting to play with you again, you're not in the flow, and you're not probably in the seriousness of the game. And playing to win, even when you're in the zone, you are playing to win, but you're not worrying about winning. You're worrying about what you're doing in the game. You're worrying about the game. You're worrying about the play. But do you understand what I mean? What I'm saying? So like the highest.
Time stands still. They're in the moment.
Yeah.
They're dealing with whatever is in front of them for them to deal with.
Yes.
Like, running, cycling, whatever. It's what's happening right now. That is all there is. And you read so much about,
and it's like who they are. The whole state of their being is playing the game fully. And if the game is the game, but the part of the rules of the game are to win. If you're playing it by the rules, but you're not thinking about you're not worried about at that particular instant winning the game. But it's natural that, but you're not thinking about that. You're not worried about that. You're just doing all there is. And if you're doing all there is in the play, playing it by the design of the rules. And typically the rules will tell you how to play the game and how to win the game, which is what you're playing it for. In the case of sports, let's say.
Yeah, but because I'm not even vaguely sports oriented, the only what you're saying.
For board games too. I mean, it's the same thing when you're with your family.
But the listening to you speak about what you've just been speaking about, I'm thinking of playing a band, playing music. There are rules, and then when you're at the edge of where the rules are, there are things that happen. I've played in bands before, and on Friday I was jamming with a bunch of pupils, and there were minutes where we didn't know what was going to happen, but it just happened. I can't really articulate it very well.
No, but I get the idea. I've not played, but I know that's what I love. And again, you can go watch Soul because they play music as well.
Yeah.
And jazz is very much about that. It's about that conversation. It's a conversation in the music between the different participants in the band.
Yeah.
And they're listening and talking about it, and you're in the zone, and there's I mean, there's a certain amount of unspoken, they're not necessarily codified rules, but when you're in the zone and you're playing, and anyway, so yeah.
And I have had that experience playing guitar where I've played something and I've noticed the reaction of the other people I'm playing with, and then I've also noticed my own reaction. I'm like, where did that come from? I can't explain or articulate it. But what's interesting is that I'm very aware of what the rules are and what the framework is within which I'm operating, and then I'm exploring all of those characteristics of play. I think I actually think everything you're saying about I think asking myself am I in a play state of mind or not, or looking for ways to create that play state of mind could be a really great way of playing the game of life and a way of approaching things.
I think it is. And to come back to the question and have a little bit of a more not comprehensive answer, but it's to look at how you're being and what you're doing and what you're saying, which comes directly correlated with better knowing yourself. And we don't always know necessarily, but it's something to strive for, possibly. And if you're putting in juxtaposition or in some kind of opposition to say, well, should I play to win the game or make others want to play with me again? One is to observe and be able to notice for yourself. And I think let's say this is a technical term, so I think it's okay to say from a language perspective, am I being a dick? Am I being a dick about this? About the way that I'm playing the game in order to win? Am I, or am I concerned about like what the game is, about whether I'm in a play state of mind, and playing with others, looking after others? And I don't mean taking care of them, but just listening. Where are others at? Are you beating them on the head? Is that your way of playing to win? Because back to what we just talked about, being in the flow, if you're in the flow of things, then you are kind of course you're playing to win, but there's a lot of games that everybody has a great experience of playing the game and might want to play again. So I think if you have that, there's another way to look at it. If you have that question, look at yourself and how you're playing, and maybe you're not being particularly nice if nobody wants to play with you again. If you're beating it on the head of people, or if you're cheating constantly and it's not what the game is, and the game happens at multiple levels. Like if you're playing a board game, there's part of the game is to play the board game, and part of a possible game is to hang out with your friends and have fun.
Yeah.
And if people are cheating because it's just that's the way the game is being played at that particular point, most of the time it's unspoken. And this is where we talk about a social contract. And there's a lot to be said. We could talk multiple episodes about social contract. But it's something it's something that we talk about a lot in the role-playing tabletop role-playing game theory podcast that I contribute to and participated in French. Because
the social contract, really?
Yeah, big time. Social contract yes, it is. It's a big deal. Because it's a bigger deal in role-playing games than it is in any other type of games.
You're going to have to explain it to me. I'm interested.
Because in role-play, so it's a big deal in role-playing games because role-playing games are extremely subjective.
Yeah.
What I mean by that is a board game has specific rules that if you're gathering with your friends to play the game, you know immediately if you're not playing the games by the rules or not. And you don't even have to be friends to play the game. You could just play the game, enjoy playing the game without ever talking, or barely, just what's necessary to play the game. Imagine, right?
That's true. Yeah.
And you could take it for chess. You could play chess with somebody you don't know, and enjoy a game of chess with somebody you don't know to enjoy the game of chess.
Yeah.
You could equally do the kind of thing like play Monopoly with friends and just mess around, but that's different. That's not what I'm talking about. Tabletop role-playing games are different because they're cooperative. There's a lot of cooperative board games as well, but they also have specific rules that you follow. So there's no interpretation. But role-playing games have a huge space of interpretation of not only the rules, but what you're looking for in the game, what kind of game you're playing.
Wow.
And there's just a massive range of being able to interpret that makes it important. But very little conversation. And a lot of people who start in this, well, obviously they're young and it's something that's not common and or weird. So you might feel self-conscious about saying, well, okay, this is what the game is about. So to establish what the social contract is.
Okay.
So it feels weird to establish what a social contract is.
Okay.
Most of the time we don't need it. And there's a large, it feels strange, and some people will get riled up if you feel the need to define what the social contract is. But the social contract is there in case of, like any contract, is in case of something going wrong. So, for example, one of the simple social contracts and something that is talked about in more caring and inclusive, and there's sets of tools called for emotional control and behavior on role-playing game tables. There's multiple tools. There are a lot of people that hate those kinds of things, that are like, well, if this is going to be like that, I don't want to play it. But typically there's a high level of correlation between people who don't like those types of rules, and people who don't pay attention to how others feel, or believe that it's, they're going to be, there's a high correlation with people that have problematic behaviors at a table, and people who don't like the establishment of the rules. So for example, one classic, and these are things that you don't usually need in most social conventions, because you also don't talk about things like you do in role-playing games. So
this is interesting, because I never considered that playing role-playing games allows people to talk about the social contract and talk about, because that's exactly what we were doing last night. We were establishing the relationships. So playing role-playing games actually gives you a way of looking at and examining and analyzing and establishing and creating the relationships that characters have between each other and the whole world of an entire game, and understanding that those rules can change. Now, that's also the same in reality, but nobody talks about it in real life.
Yeah. Here's one funny thing that you might want to notice.
That's blown my mind.
So, okay, did you notice how childish all the different Post-it notes were on the Miro board?
No, I didn't. Yes, I did.
Are we usually? So I know we're usually a little bit childlike, like silly comments that we make while we chat, but this was a whole other level.
Well,
arguably, what I was going to point out,
it was a whole other level,
I didn't mind, but that kind of so one, it's interesting, because I take it to a certain level as being a reaction to what we were doing to the game. And one way to react is to be very childish about something that you either feel uncomfortable with or don't understand what's going on.
But the other thing I think,
nothing wrong, but just
but the other thing that I think, certainly my experience last night, but certainly what I'm discovering right now in the conversation about playing role-playing games and playing games like that, allows for that kind of exploration that you wouldn't normally get to do. And you wouldn't. Yes,
that's what I love about role-playing games.
It might be childish, but it's there.
Yeah, sure.
It doesn't.
So, but
it's a perfectly legitimate expression of what's going on.
Well, amongst ourselves, but if you showed up at a different table and you didn't say and agree at the beginning, okay, well, we're playing and no childish behavior at the table. Right. And now among friends, of course, there's always a level of childish behavior. But what I'm talking about is, for example, there's one series of tools called the lines and veils.
Okay.
The idea is to be able for people to say that there's content that they would be uncomfortable with, or that we don't want to have at the table at all in the stories that we're going to tell. Because there's a lot of different types of games, including games that would have either potentially difficult or
the themes might be challenging.
So for example, lines are things and topics where you agree from the beginning that those are just don't exist. We will not cover and talk about anything to do with that topic or theme.
Okay.
It can be just and veils are something that may happen within the game, but you're just going to throw a veil on it and pass over the fact that it happens, so you don't go into detail.
Okay, cool.
So it's a way for people to protect themselves, and it's as simple as, and it feels like, so as simple as to go. So for example, I would go, well, the lines in my game is there's no sexual assault or violence, no sexual assault, violence, no violence towards children, or like anything to do with violence in children, and that's it. And the veils on anything to do with sex. There might be something that happens with sex, but you just pass over it. Once it happens, you don't describe it.
That's a really great mechanic. I never knew that.
Or similarly, so a friend of mine who plays has a phobia of needles. That's her thing. So one of her lines when we play is there's just is a line, no needles, no talk of needles, no mention of needles, nothing.
Wow. And it's so great that, and again, I'm getting this for the first time, right? And I can see why I'm remembering at school, there were a bunch of friends that I had who did really play a lot of role-playing games. And I was kind of on the edge listening, and like, I never really played, but it was that idea of being able to articulate what works for you and where your lines are and whatever, and being able to communicate that to other people is a really powerful thing to be able to do. And you get to practice that in the context of a game.
Yes.
And I like to think that if you can do it in the context of a game, you could do it in real life.
Possibly.
Maybe.
There's a lot there is a lot to be taken in that direction. And there's a lot of not controversy, but discussion around those kinds of things, which I think are really powerful because they allow a lot of people to be able to say, this is what we want, and avoid really silly situations, because that's a lot of what, not silly, but just, or, just wrong situations of, going into some kind of adventure, and all of a sudden there's like some sexual assault thing where you're like, well, I don't, okay, why is this happening?
Yeah, because weren't we talking about the fact that there's a lot more push and a big discussion within the world of role-playing games for representation, inclusion?
Yeah.
Were we talking about?
Yeah, there's a lot of that going on. Yeah.
And is that happening within the world of role-playing games now?
Mm-hmm.
It hadn't happened before.
It's been happening for a while, but it's happening in the world all over, right? It's Me Too has been, and it was already there probably to a certain extent in role-playing games, because of course, like the world of gaming altogether, it's a kind of area that's overrepresented in dudes, just in general, and that's more and more popular than before. There's the Dungeons and Dragons has its most popular year ever. Last year, thanks to actual plays like Critical Role, so YouTube shows where there's people playing, so there's a lot more people that got to be aware of it. More people playing online, and now there's a lot of traditional, just like in the world of video games, so there's more and more women and either non-binary or other kinds of people playing those games, but playing all kinds of games. And the games are going into like, how do we become and evolve and to be more inclusive, to attract a wider variety of people, women,
which could make the game more interesting. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it does. The whole world of game life, real life game, I think it certainly makes it more, I think, more accessible to actually. And again, I'm discovering this right now. The making and breaking down situations in real life in a game situation where you get to explore and bring play to it would help create real life situations. Yeah. It's that whole flip.
Well, there's enormous amounts of values from playing and role-playing games that people get in terms of confidence, in terms of being okay with themselves, in terms of there's tons of different value that people get from playing role-playing games.
And play. Sure. And play is so important for learning anyway.
You could also take it into escaping, and it's equally used. I don't know about equally, but some people will use it to escape their day-to-day, because there's a lot about escape as well, and just living in, trying to experience or imagine and but for sure, but because by virtue of it being role-playing game, a lot of what you're doing is putting yourself into somebody else's shoes.
Mm-hmm.
So there is naturally an encouragement to look beyond how your own experience is. But I say that, although you could also play for 30 years the same exact character, because some people do that. Some people have played exactly the same game of Dungeons and Dragons with the same character, with the same friends every week, like their poker night. And I'm not saying that's wrong. It's great.
Yeah.
But then if you've been playing the same thing for 30 years, you might not have been massively encouraging yourself to step into somebody else's shoes. Like you chose the shoes 30 years ago and you're still doing the same. Now, so it depends. There's all sorts of different ways to play it. This is what I was saying, but also just like the game of life, I guess.
Yeah. I'm reminded of that story you told me about where I don't know, I can't remember who it is you were talking to. You asked them, so what is it? What are you guys playing now? Is it Fortnite?
Oh, the story that I came from, that was a Twitter thing that I saw. Yeah. People were like, no, have you heard about this thing called Fortnite show yesterday? Have you heard of this thing called Dungeons and Dragons? That's funny.
Yeah, it is. And I think there's play, the importance of play can't be understated. It can't. As a way of learning, the fact it's innate, the fact you see animals, everybody. That it's such a not everybody, everything.
Well, living thing, mammals in particular, but not only.
Yeah,
and we learn through play.
Birds
So
play.
Sure, play to win, and also play to have other people want to play with you again. And if you're not a dick, generally you'll find people who want to play with you. And if some people don't want to play with you, it's also not personal. Maybe it's just whatever. So I guess we was talking about the School of Life videos. I was checking out a few School of Life videos. You can also go there. I'm sure we might have other episodes on getting over what people think of you. But yeah, don't be a dick. Sorry, it's a good one. And if you look and ask, find out more about because we don't see it. If I said something that was offensive to someone, I would trust a friend to tell me that they've said something so that I can readjust, because otherwise I don't know what's going on and I don't know what I've said.
Yep.
And if they don't tell you, then maybe they're not that much of a friend anyway.
Yep. And so much of the drama I see with the older pupils with all the pupils, actually, doesn't matter what age, 11 to 18 in my school, is where something like that hasn't been addressed.
Yeah.
And then it balloons into this huge thing.
It's a very normal thing for teenagers and most adults to do anyway.
Yeah.
And we spend a lot of time in that kind of drama. Which is actually, I would venture to say, not all that interesting and not that worth spending that much time. Now, I say this as somebody who's, of course, spent a lot of time as a drama queen, as in high school, agonizing over like, oh my God, I'm in love with this lady who's not in love with me, or whatever else was going on. I had a whole big drama with a bunch of people who'd rejected me and I didn't understand why, because supposedly I'd said something about someone that I didn't, and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that's just also the drama of teenagehood.
Discovering how much of a drama queen I was in my early 20s through the self-development work that I did was a shock. And
it took until I was 37 to discover that. So
getting to own it and then have the choice was what was really liberating for me. It's like, oh wow, I didn't have to.
There's always
I could enjoy the game
if you're interested in looking at them.
There's what? Sorry.
Always new things to discover about yourself if you're interested in looking. And sometimes we're not. Sometimes I'm less interested in really hardcore looking at things, which is probably these days. I'm like, yeah, I'm happy with what's going on. I don't want to go and discover dark things again in how I am. I've done a lot of that. Not saying I'm never going to do that again. And there's always new things to discover. But sometimes, just like, okay, cool. I've done enough.
It is what it is. So keep playing, basically.
Yeah.
Enjoy the game.